Today we're going to talk about how we can use spatial awareness and loading the arm and shoulder different to really accelerate the recovery of arm and shoulder function. In the previous video we talked about the foot and how we can relearn the foot to move better, to stabilize better. Today we're going to focus on the arm and the shoulder, one of the most challenging areas together with the hand to recover after a stroke. There's one simple reason why that is. The hand, if we look at the brain, this is the front, this is the back, this is the frontal lobe, this is the occipital lobe, parietal lobe. Primary motor area. If the hand is affected, the hand, as explained in the previous videos, has a very cortical representation. The foot, toes to a lesser extent. Anything doing with the hand is very human. It's more frontally located, it's more dependent on frontal lobe function, less so in the shoulders and the trunk. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today too. So arm function, hand function is more difficult to regain. The legs are there, they are made to move in synchronicity. We have reflexes built in that will help automated leg movement. There's no such thing as automated hand movement. So the hand and the arm are much more tricky to rehabilitate. There are some concepts though that you can use to really speed up the recovery of the arm and the shoulder. It's often underutilized, and I'm going to show you in this video how you can use three principles. Principle number one, increasing spatial awareness and sensory feedback to create a improved sensory motor activation loop. You have to know where the arm is in space basically. We are going to focus on loading the arm and the hand differently to create more feedback. That's point number two that I'm going to talk about. And item number three are the inbuilt reflexes that you have that can help arm and shoulder movement without even focusing per se on the affected arm. So let's start with number one. You have to know where a limb is in space. Look at it this way. If your brain does not have the right representation of an arm, especially of a hand, of the upper arm, of the leg in space, or you have a different body picture in your head than what is actually really happening, the rehabilitation efforts that you undertake are much more difficult. So you have to be aware where your limb is in space and very exact picture of how you learned movements with your hand in the first place to regain function. So in other words, if the feedback from your arm is incorrect, which it often is after a stroke, you can never relearn in a rapid way. If there's possibilities, you have to understand that the feedback is of crucial importance for the brain to relearn motion. If we look at the hand and we look at the brain, we know that hand information goes up and it crosses, goes to the thalamus, and then it goes to the sensory somatosensory cortex. So you become aware of what is happening. You become aware of that the hand, for example, is moving. And you become aware of the localization in the primary somatosensory strip. And then you have a transfer of information where vision, hearing, spatial awareness in the insular cortex, where you have association of what a movement means. So that all that sensory information goes to these areas. Then, in turn, this information is used to transfer to the premotor cortex and the supplementary motor cortex in the frontal lobe to help initiate movement from the primary motor cortex. So that is how important sensory information from the affected site is. Now, you have to realize when you don't have movement, which you often don't have, you either have a loss of muscle tone, and you have like really primary parietal sensory issues. You can have increased muscle tone because of a basal ganglionic or primary motor area lesion. But in both cases you have less feedback to your brain. And what is the biggest input into your brain? It's movement information. Yeah, it's the 1A afferents to the brain that go to these sensory areas. So we have to somehow restore this motion, and we have to do things to increase awareness to the brain. First of all, you have to test if there's a sensory loss. I can promise you, when you test most stroke survivors, it's not as accurate as it should be. So you have to become, first of all, aware that your clients have sensory issues. They don't know exactly where their arm or hand is in space. Either they don't know where their whole body is in space, so they have like stability issues. You see that their center of pressure is off, so we can work on that. So that's very important. Also, then the whole center is off, or they have sensory issues because of spasticity or loss of muscle tone. You don't feed the primary afferents to the brain, and we don't get the proper feedback to relearn motor patterns. And in the arm it's much more complicated because we don't have the compensation from the proximal muscle areas, the shoulder areas, the automated movement from the reticulospinal pathways, the rubrospinal pathways that go to the middle of the limbs. We don't have the huge cerebellar influence on the stability of motor, constant integration and comparison if you're making the right motions. When it is the hand and the arm, that is less, there are less possibilities to compensate with these other, the extrapyramidal pathways, with the different tracks outside of the corticospinal tracks, which are really directed to the hand as well. So you have to be aware where your limb is in space. If you want to have better rehab outcomes and you want to accelerate the results that you have with your rehabilitation, then you have to address the sensory issues, movement issues in the arm. So that is one. You have to know where the limb is in space. Now, second issue that we have to address to have regain movement in the arm and the shoulder is that we have to start loading, and again loading the arm, increasing awareness of the arm is a very important issue. First of all, you have to understand that your hand needs to do something. It has to have purpose to what it's doing. So you have to give it a task, but that's difficult when you are completely spastic and have your arm in the wrong position. But giving it a simple task is sometimes the start of improved awareness in the brain. So we grasp on item number one. You have to know what's going on. We have to load differently. Most rehabilitation of the arm is in free motion. The arm is hanging. when the arm is hanging and there's spasticity and the hand is like this, you have very much decreased awareness in the higher brain centers. So what do we do? What can we do to increase awareness? Well, first of all, you probably have heard, or maybe you have not heard, is that when we start to apply pressure from a quadrupedic sense, so we are all on all fours, which is of course difficult when you had a stroke, but when you manage to be on all fours, you suddenly have pressure on the shoulders and you have different pressure on the hips. So one of the ways to improve awareness of the brain is to increase the load on the shoulders, and you don't just do that by doing things with the arm, you do it by putting pressure on the arm, whether that is on the back with a weight in the arm, where you have shoulder compression in an anatomical stable position, or whether that's in a quadrupedic position. I would suggest that you try to do it having your clients on all fours. Why? Because the brain develops from a quadrupedic position. Remember, when you are born, you start to move at random, and with the help of inbuilt primitive reflexes, you start to interact with your environment, you learn to roll over, you are on the side, and before you know it, you're on your stomach, you start to lift your head up, you start to develop your vestibular system, and then when you start crawling, we start to activate different movement patterns that help develop the brain. Remember, the brain is developed from the bottom up. So you develop the brain by stimulating the brainstem, the medulla, the pons, the mesencephalic, midbrain areas, and you develop the brain. The layers are built from the bottom up by starting to have more and more complex movements, but it starts with lying on the back, rolling, being on the stomach, lifting your head, propping yourself up, and being on all fours, crawling. And don't make any mistakes, you need those stages to properly layer the brain. If you don't, we know there's more and more research coming out. There was not that much research until 10 years ago, but there's more and more research coming out that all of these movement positions, different body positions, are needed to build the different layers in the brain and the complexity in your movement capacity. Now, when you have a stroke, you lose the top-down control of the brain, which makes it possible to relearn very complex movement patterns. One of the reasons is that probably up to 90% of what's happening in the higher brain centers has a pontomedullary reticular component. So the reticular formation in the brainstem, which is a series of neuronal pools in the brainstem that play a very important role in modifying movement patterns. Walking, crawling, swimming, rhythmic movements. The up and down regulation of muscle tones comes from the brainstem, but the brainstem's capacity to do so is directly also directed and orchestrated by the higher brain centers. We always send a component to the brainstem that has to do with the stabilization. If you want to move an arm or a leg, you send a signal at the same time to the brainstem to stabilize the whole system, so you can make this movement without falling over. So this is a very complex interactivity. If you want to reorganize movement, it is a very good idea to go through these different stages. So to train on the back, to train on the stomach, to train on all fours. If you can make the movement patterns that you were making when you were younger. So then you are loading the shoulders different. The shoulders can handle that very well. I know from experience with our clients that they feel very good doing this because they're always with the shoulder in this position. Once you start loading it from here, it might take some effort to put them in that situation. But I can guarantee you, when you hold on to a bar, you start leaning into it, or you lean on all fours if that's possible, and you can start making crawling movements. The crossed movements that are involved in crawling, you have a tremendous impact on the brain, but also down to the legs, I talked about it before, the inbuilt cross-chord patterns that we're going to talk about a little bit later. They are activated and they help moving better. So we have to start loading different. In this case I was talking about the shoulders. Now there's a very exciting other way that we can do. Most people are capable of grasping something or have a sling or a strap around the wrist and the hand so they can hold, for example, a weight in the hands. You weigh the arms down a little bit. So we really get a stretch on the lower arm muscles, on the tendons and capsules around the shoulder. That is one component of it, and the hand needs to do something. The hand is there. If it's just in this position and it's not used, the brain forgets that you have an underarm and the hand. So you have to give the hand something to do, so you bring back meaning and purpose to the brain, and that is very powerful for the frontal lobe motivational and initiation area. So we load the shoulder different, we load the hand different, and in that we go back to item number 1. We create more awareness and we make it more possible to create more complex movements and to add layers of complexity to movement possibility. So that was item number 2. Now item number 3 we have talked about before. We have 4 limbs. The 4 limbs, they are connected through complicated intraspinal reflex patterns where we have a reticular spinal influence that has up and down regulated movement. We have a cross-callosal influence with the inhibition and disinhibition that we talked about. And if you have not seen those videos yet, I would say go back to video 1 or video 2 where we talk at more length on the cross-chord patterns. But the inbuilt reflexes that help automated movement out of efficiency, you can use also to retrain an arm. So when we have an arm that does not move, we know from research, from the literature, that if this arm is not functioning, and this is not functioning, this is really not functioning, this is functioning a little bit less, this is where the head is, then we can use the other arm to influence this arm. There's direct influence. If I do this with one arm, I promote extension on the other arm. When I'm in a walking movement and I activate forward movement on the other side, there's reflexes that help the extension on the other side. And the opposite happens. So if this leg is moving forward, this arm is helped in moving forward. So if we can somehow, even if we cannot use this arm, we can make a coupled motion with, for example, the leg and the arm in a diagonal way, and we will still have an effect on the affected arm. So also in this case it really pays off to use these crossed patterns and create the momentum to start moving the arm better. And I cannot re-emphasize this enough. If this is repeated over weeks, over months, we not only decrease muscle tone, when there's spasticity, or we manage muscle tone better by the up and down regulation and inter-extremity influences, we also create more movement. So because we start reconnecting the arm, just like we do when we apply different load on the shoulders and on the hand, we increase the awareness, the purpose of the hand. When we start involving the movements in a natural way, we couple the movements, whether we're crawling, whether we're in the water using all fours, whether you help with a couple of therapists to move all fours in a synchronized way, in a synchronized pattern, in a crossed way, then we start reintegrating and reconnecting, remembering what the arm is supposed to do, and that will activate the sensory feedback, it will activate the motor patterns that are already there, that are often suppressed. So it really pays off to use these inbuilt crossed reactions, either with bilateral movement of the arms, which in turn influences through the quadrupedal transfer, through the interlimb transfer, we have an effect even if you cannot do so much with an arm or a leg to start off with. But in case of the arm, we can really use the other extremities to have a movement consequence on the affected arm. So, in this video we talked about the shoulder and the arm, one of the most difficult areas to rehabilitate, but we can do things to accelerate recovery. We can do things to create awareness. You're better aware of where the limbs are in space, where the arm is in space. You can do that in a lot of different ways. You can have a sensory input, you can increase the warmth of the arm, which will increase the speed of conduction of the 1A afferents. You have to move with the affected arm, whether that is passive or active. Active is of course not so much in the beginning. It will create a positive feedback loop. This sensory motor loop that is enhanced will promote the possibility of increased movement. So the second point is we start loading the shoulders different. We start to give the hand purpose again by putting a load in the hand, whether you use a strap to keep the load in place. The brain starts to recognize that the hand is in function, even if it's like a primitive grasp activity or a grasp reflex that has reappeared because of the stroke. That is the beginning, and from there you start to build in more complexity in the movements. And then the third one, we use the crossed cord reflexes that are inbuilt in your spinal cord to really ramp things up, reconnect the limbs, let the limbs do what they are there for, and it's much easier when that is done in synchronicity with the other extremities. And not only do you have an effect on the spinal cord level, you have an effect on the brainstem level, on the cerebellar level. You have activities in the deep brain, look at the basal ganglia, the thalamus, we have the sensory motor feedback, and we have the intercallosal, crossed callosal disinhibition and inhibition that really starts activating the areas that are still functioning in a much better way than when just training the arm in itself. No matter how great the feedback, the computer steered movement and feedback with EMS is, actual motion that you do yourself or your help with is the most powerful feedback that you can create, because it's real, it's lifelike. Your brain recognizes that it is lifelike, and it will respond better than a computerized or electronic signal. It's just that simple. There is a difference, even if the brain does not always know it, but the is the recognition of these movement patterns that are natural. That is the key. Now, in a next video, we are going to show how you can enhance this effect even further by addressing balance, doing things with balance to increase the learning effect, the awareness, fixing balance issues that are there after a stroke, and they are there if you look for them. And we're going to show how you can use this system in the home situation, in practice, on top of what you're already doing in rehab, or as a standalone system. So we're going to show in the next video how, in a stepwise teaching method, you can start applying these principles in your practice on top of what you're already doing, or as a standalone system, or how you can enhance the results with any stroke survivor. So I hope to see you in the next video. If you have not done so, look at the previous videos. You can click them below this video. Until the next video.